Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of Unscripted and Unchained RPG Review. I am DM Bluddworth, and as you can see by the graphics, today's video is an Unchained take on the TTRPG hobby. And I'm specifically looking at the comments that Jeremy Crawford made sometime last week, I believe, where he basically said there is nothing canonical prior to 2014. So essentially, since the release of 5e, that existed previously in Dungeons and Dragons, or it certainly wasn't going to be carried over into what is now considered canon of Dungeons and Dragons. And I've watched several other people's videos, and I've been following it around, along. I read the content, and I will go over the content of his actual statements as it was reported in the original article in which he was interviewed. So I will go over that as well. And there are, I think there's some questions I still have that weren't answered by anyone else's videos on this subject, or at least not to my knowledge. I haven't come across anyone that actually hit on the points that I'm going to today. And more significantly, I don't see what the purpose of the comments were. And so that's why I ask, or that's why I label the comments as being ridiculous. But I will support my conclusion that they were ridiculous during the course of this video. I also asked the question, and this was really going to be the focus, a day or two ago when I first started thinking about doing this video. If D&D prior to 2014 is not canon, then 5e is not D&D after 2014, because I think so much of that canon really produced the game that it did. I mean, in some cases, a game's mechanics will generate the environment and the setting that it's taking place in, and so the mechanics inform the canon, inform the lore of the setting. But in other cases, the setting actually comes first, and it drives the game content. And so to try to separate the two, I don't really see how Jeremy Crawford does the mental gymnastics in order to do that. So, but without going too far, on a tangent, I'm just going to go right to the article in which he was speaking. So what I did was I did a cut and paste, because I took out all the advertisements and everything from it, and I'm not going to reveal which website this came from, but it came from a comic book related website. So Wizards of the Coast has provided some clarity on the canon of Dungeons and Dragons in regards to what is considered canon for the core role-playing game, and so on. And I'm going to focus on several points that are made here. While speaking to the media last week ahead of its D&D Live event, lead rules designer Jeremy Crawford discussed the canon of Dungeons and Dragons, particularly when it comes to popular novel series such as Dragonlance novels by Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman, or the Drizzt novels by R.A. Salvatore. And I'm just going to hit on the highlighted portions where Crawford said part of that is, we don't want DMs to feel that in order to run the game, they need to read a certain set of novels. We want you to read them for the joy of reading them, not as homework. I'm going to address that first point, right here. Let's see where I'm going to begin. So he mentioned Dragonlance, or So I will bring that up first. I don't have to read these in order to run even the officially released Dragonlance novel, Dragonlance Adventures. And he specifically talks about that, but I mean, this wasn't homework as he calls it. All right, I can actually play Dungeons and Dragons, even in the world of Kryn setting, and not have read the books. All right, and I'm going to show that. I also did not need this in order to run it either. Yes, this does help. All right. Yes, this does talk about the game mechanics. All right, that I can then apply to playing the game. But when I first ran those adventures, all right, we ran all of them. I didn't have this. All right, this I believe came out later. Came out later than when we actually ran those adventures. Let's see when this was released. So this was released in 1987, well after the the modules had come out. So we didn't even have this. He's right that the first module came out before these. All right, and so was this required reading then? All right, so it didn't make any sense in that statement anyhow. So let me move on and go back to his statement. He says, I started playing D&D as a kid and I ran the original Dragons of Despair, the first Dragonlance Adventure module, which actually came out before the novels did. So that kind of blows his first premise away. Crawford said, for me, Dragonlance has always been a wonderful D&D war story where the DM gets to play through their own version of the war story. And then the novels are one way where the story plays out. That's how we view all D&D novels. Crawford also noted that they would dive more into the D&D canonicity in a future developer blog post in the coming months. All right. So he talks about while the idea that the foundational novels that help to build the world, such as Kryn and Faerun, might not exist within official canon, Crawford said that the decision ultimately brings the focus to the story that the Dungeon Master and the players want to tell when playing Dungeons and Dragons. When it comes to the RPG, that's important is each DM's story and the story they create for their players. All right. The moment you are at the game table, it is no longer our Dragonlance or the Forgotten Realms, our Forgotten Realms. It's your Forgotten Realms. It's your Dragonlance. You are now telling your story in those settings. Let's go back to, again, he initially said that the adventure came out, the adventure module came out, Dragons of Despair, came out before the books. So what he's arguing here is just not, doesn't follow his own timeline. Now let me show you a snippet from Dragons of Despair. So here we have Dragons of Despair, and as you're reading, so this is chapter 1, The Road Travels, as you can see. Dragons of Despair is designed for a party of 6 to 8 player characters, levels 4 through 6. Encourage a good balance of character classes in the party. The adventure demands skills of each class. Now, yes, this does give you, I'm sorry, wrong screen. Now, yes, this does give you the pre-generated characters. I will show you they're somewhere here. They give you all the pre-gens. Oh, there they were. So they give you all the pre-generated characters. However, there is no requirement that you use them. All right, and so by default, if you're using your own characters, then you're not playing their Dragonlance adventures or their Kryn. You're playing your own game. See, he's creating a straw man here that just didn't exist. I mean, it's, by his own timeline, it does not exist. No one was sitting there saying, I can't play in the world of Greyhawk unless I've read, you know, this this stack of books here. All right. I didn't have to read these in order to play in the world of Greyhawk. I didn't have to have this in order to play in the world of Greyhawk. What I did need to have as a DM running my campaigns in the world of Greyhawk was this. And this came out in 1983. Now, if they're going to say that this is no longer canon for the world of Greyhawk setting, that's a real problem. I mean, how do you take the setting materials and say, well, that lore and that setting details, none of those apply anymore? It just doesn't make sense. Let's go back to his statement now. And here we go. If you're looking for what's official in Dungeons & Dragons role-playing game, it's what appears in the products for the role-playing game, which these supplements are. Basically, our stance is that if it has not appeared in a book since 2014, the 5th edition core rulebooks came out, we don't consider it canonical for the games. While certain works might no longer be considered in canon, that doesn't mean that Dungeons & Dragons designers don't think highly of the past stories or that certain characters or pieces of lore will never be reinstated into official D&D lore. Listen, I'm going to be, very direct here. Don't piss on my leg and tell me that it's raining. All right? There is no way that they are going to bring back and reinsert any of the prior D&D lore without twisting it to fit their own vision for what 5e is. All right, they're going to just take the name only and then change everything up around it. And we've seen indications of this already. We've seen how they have removed racial traits, made them completely interchangeable. We've seen how they've removed alignment, all right, from one of their most, recent supplements, which they are going to consider canon, I'm assuming, based on this. So alignment no longer matters, so you no longer have good and evil, and on either of the extremes, it's like everything is a gray area. All right, and so there are no more inherently evil races. There are no longer inherently good races. There's no longer any kind of a conflict that that is represented by the powers of good and evil. All right, based on the fact that, well, they're removing these various things, and those were elements that were not just in books, novels, weren't just in supplements, whether it be this or, or even this here. Those were in the rule books. Those were in the core rule books. Those were in the player's handbook, in the dungeon master's guide, and in the monster manuals. And so when they say that they're only looking to question the whether or not novels and other side secondary materials are part of the canon, no, they're going to take that step further than that. All right. They are going to move towards saying, because they've already shown signs of it, they are going to start saying that nothing prior to 2014, including the rules books, are canonical. Let me move on to see if there's any more in this here that I wanted to focus on. So players shouldn't need to read anything other than the in-print D&D rule books to understand what exists within the official D&D lore. I've already just laid out the fact that they are going to remove the pre-2014 rule books as well. And then finally, let me see if there's anything else. And no, there was nothing else in the Dragons of Despair. So now I always like to focus on not just pointing out where I see that there's a problem, all right, but what's the best response to that? And in my view, the best response is to step forward with something positive. And that positive thing is for more and more DMs out there that actually care about the not just the legacy of what Dungeons and Dragons was prior to 2014, but they want to actively bring new players to the old game systems. And that really comes down to organizing play around the older editions of the game. So in response to it, I am going to start running a series of campaigns, probably multiple times per week, possibly as many as two or three times per week, just introducing players to Dungeons and Dragons basic, either using the Moldvay or going right to the BECMI or BECMI, but just covering the first two. So just doing the basic and the expert and setting it in the world of Greyhawk and running those rules as close to raw as possible. Maybe with only two exceptions. And that's maximum hit points at first level. And if the player chooses to place their attribute rolls, they can place their attribute rolls. But everything else I'm running as close to raw as is possible to run. And in the setting, as the setting is written, and so forth. So, and I think that if more and more of us get out there and start running these games, especially on platforms like Roll20 or Fantasy Grounds, because Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds keep track of what kind of games are being run. And if they start to see that there is a big influx of players playing the older editions, then maybe that will start getting that message out there that that a large number of us are just not happy with where Wizards of the Coast is taking 5e. All right, and you'll notice I don't call it D&D 5e because they don't seem to want anything but the label. All right, and so I'm not going to give that to them. So, many of us are not, many of us that grew up with the games from either the mid to late 70s through the 1980s. I mean, Jeremy Crawford's talking about how he played when he was young, but we don't know when that was, whether that was in the 80s or the 90s. But it's just, it's like I said, it's pissing on our leg and telling us that it's raining out. All right, it's just a ridiculous statement to make. And that's the final point I want to get to with this, is that what was the purpose behind making this statement? I mean, what did he believe he was going to gain by it? I don't think that pronouncing that nothing canonical was prior to 2014, that is not going to lead to 1 extra cent in sales for Wizards of the Coast. All right? No person that is happy with 5e now is going to say, oh, well, because they made that statement, I'm going to buy even more 5e than I was intending to do anyway. Nothing about that statement is going to convince someone like myself to go out and buy any new product or a reboot that Wizards of the Coast is going to produce using one of those old properties, whether it be Greyhawk or Dragonlance. I don't want Greyhawk 5th edition. All right, I don't need it. I have the original. All right, I don't want Greyhawk in name only. I want the lore that I grew up with and I played with. All right, I don't need a new version of the lore. All right, if it was just to reproduce the and just repackage the old stuff, and without the ridiculous disclaimer that they slap on it as well, then maybe I would consider you purchasing it. But not after all of the shenanigans that they've been pulling over these last, couple of years. Not with all of these swatting at the hornet's nest for no reason whatsoever. You just don't see this kind of thing coming out of Hasbro's Magic the Gathering developers. They're not out there swatting at the people that originally started playing the game 20 years ago. All right. They're not out there saying, well, I mean, they might phase out different card sets for their play, but they're not out there saying, well, we're not going to treat these as, with any kind of reverence or any kind of a nod and a thank you for what they've produced in the past, and they're building on that with new sets. They just don't go out there and do unnecessary attacks on a portion of their player base, no matter how big that portion is. All right. And these statements that he made last week don't do anything to sell anything extra. All right. No new player is going to say, oh, well, I'm going to buy the next 5th edition Greyhawk Adventures because they slapped the name Greyhawk on it. They're going to realize that, well, they just slapped a name on it. They've changed everything, and us older players are certainly not going to buy it because we either have the originals or we just don't like where they're going with it. So I know that some people are going to agree with me, disagree with me. I know I've been going, back and forth with several people, and several people who I actually follow and I actually, 90% of the time agree with, that are going to disagree with me and say, well, canon doesn't exist once it gets to your table. And I disagree with that idea. All right, because I believe that there are certain parts of the lore that drive the game mechanics, and there are certain game mechanics that created the lore. I think that they're in some cases inseparable. And so, you could say that, well, I'm using the rules and I'm using the lore at my table that I wish to use, and if it's a dramatic departure from what Dungeons and Dragons was, you're no longer playing Dungeons and Dragons. You're playing something else, and that's fine. That's fine for you to say, well, I'm going to modify these rules and this lore so much that it's unrecognizable, but we're going to play it this way because that's the way we want to play it. That's fine. I'm not saying that you can't or shouldn't do that, but to then turn around and say, well, but this is still Dungeons and Dragons, that's just not the case. All right. So again, I know that some people are going to disagree, and I welcome your comments in there. Please come in there and tell me this is what I disagree with you on, and go forward from there. Um, Even better though is if you believe that there's a positive way that you can bring these older editions out to people, then, and it's not something that I already spoke about, then, love to hear the tips as well. Love to hear the way that you might actually go out there and say, well, this is what we're looking to, this is what I would do in order to make the older editions more accessible to more people and younger people. I have, in my experience over these last couple of years, I have had very few occasions where people who started playing fifth edition, that was their first introduction to Dungeons and Dragons or role playing in general, and then they played some of the older editions. Um, they very few said, I just don't like this, I'm not going to play it anymore. All right. I could probably count on less than three fingers the number of people that said, no, I'm just going back to 5e. I just don't enjoy this. All right. I've seen more people say, you know what? How can we make 5e closer to what we're doing here without some of the other elements? And they kind of make a mishmash between 5e and, AD&D first edition or second edition or so forth. But for the most part, I expect that some people are going to agree, some people will disagree, and I welcome all those comments. So once again, thanks for joining. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you hadn't subscribed, please consider subscribing. Uh, I keep on trying to turn out the content as quickly as I can. And if you have any suggestions of things that you want me to take a look at, please leave those in the comments section as well. And most of all, I look forward to seeing you on a gaming screen sometime soon. I am starting my new campaign for old school Dungeons and Dragons set in the world of Greyhawk on August 14th. So, and it's going to be a weekly, every Saturday game from 8 p.m. to anywhere from 11 to 11:30, 12 o'clock, the latest, every Saturday night, starting on August 14th. I have room for up to 16 players because I am going to break it up into anywhere from 2 to 3 different groups, and run either one shots or mini campaigns, like running running series like the B series or, the A series or whatever. But trying to utilize the old school rules, just up from levels 1 through 14, nothing beyond that. And we probably won't even go, even in the long term campaign, to that kind of a high level either. So, and I want to give people the ability to mix in, and to switch around. This Saturday doesn't work for you, come in next Saturday. I'll put you onto a different group, and we'll see how that works out. But anyway, thanks for joining. I look forward to seeing you. Have the great rest of your weekend. And as always, stay safe out there. And I look forward to seeing you on the gaming screen. Have a great day.